It's lovely to see everybody. At a time when we, on this tiny blue spot, traveling through an almost infinite universe, see the whole of what, as far as we know, is life dependent on the whims of a 5-year-old. It's lovely to spend some time with friends. So it's particularly lovely to chat with one of our adjunct professors, Stephanie Kelton. Many of us, if not all of us, have read The Deficit Myth, watched Finding the Money, and followed Stephanie's career for a long time. You might not know, I suppose, that this has included a period as chief economist on the US Senate Budget Committee and a close association with Bernie Sanders. Alongside a fund manager called Con Michilakis, it was the promptings of Stephanie that motivated us to put our master's degree together in the first place. So we have a lot to thank her for. So, hello, Stephanie.
Hello, everyone.
I was wondering where to start. And then by chance, I listened a couple of days ago to a BBC World Service program called Business Daily, which had several contributors, one of whom was you. The narrative was that rich countries are all sinking under a huge burden of debt, that we have a burden of debt interest we can't afford, and no less a luminary than the Financial Times columnist and head of King's College, Cambridge, Gillian Tett, basically said that governments have got away with it so far, that sometime soon there'll be a major default. She asked, I've got this written down to read her words, how on earth is the world going to get out of this debt burden? There was someone who Americans might know, James Carville, who implied it's the biggest problem in the world. And a bond trader called Luke Hickmore said that if we're not going to get into severe difficulties soon, then countries have to start being sensible about their spending. You got, I don't know, about 30 seconds to respond to, or not even to respond, but to contribute to the program, because you wouldn't have heard what they said before you were talking. You've got rather longer now. What's wrong with all that narrative?
Well, okay, first let me say thank you, Stephen and Gabby. I always am amazed at just the indefatigable nature of these two individuals. Unparalleled. I've never seen anything like it. Thank everybody for joining and taking time to be part of this conversation tonight. Stephen, it will surprise you, I guess, to learn that in fact, I had about as much time as I'm going to have with you tonight to
Yeah.
answer questions with the BBC. I recorded that interview. In fact, I'd forgotten about it. And they emailed me, 2 days ago and said, here's the link, it's live. And I thought, wow, I've sort of forgot that we even did it. I guess we recorded it a month and a half ago, something like that. I used the podcast, Jim. Sorry, I'm getting over a illness, so I'm a little raspier than usual. I used the podcast studio on campus, and we went at least an hour. And so you can imagine how much juicy stuff got left on the cutting room floor, so to speak, right? Uh,
Mm.
they they chose, I thought, reasonably well. You never know how they're going to piece things together, and I don't normally listen to things after the fact, but I was curious about what the others said and how they would put it together. So I did listen. And I thought that, given the challenge of trying to bring three different voices and perspectives together, they chose reasonably well. But, look, you always want to back these people up. And you said, Gillian Tett said at one point, how is the world going to get out of the debt? How is the world going to get out of this problem? Who does the world owe? I
Yeah.
mean, it doesn't even really occur to them to take that step back and ask, what is the purpose of issuing bonds in the first place? What are these? And when you try to force the person doing the interview off of the, terrain where they want to have the debate and shift them into a different lane, it's very tough because they want to have the conventional debate. What ratio of debt to GDP is too big? When does it become a problem? And you keep pushing them in a different direction and trying to get them to take that one step back. And, we would say in MMT, Where do the funds to pay taxes and buy government bonds come from in the first place? And if you can rewind to a different starting point, you can have a different conversation. But if that person on the other side doesn't want to allow you to do that, then you're constantly trying to navigate the conventional boundaries of the debate. So I can't remember what you asked me, but that's my
Yeah,
answer.
that's a good answer. I never know whether to stick within, what everyone takes for granted, the current institutional setup, or to suggest something different. And we had a talk from Scott Fullwiler the other day, where he explained what happened with Liz Truss and
Yeah.
the bond market in 2022. And it was, of course it was, because Scott was doing the talk, it was very illuminating. Um, it was a discussion, though, within the current framework. And I wonder whether, given the current institutional framework, I mean, if people like very intelligent people like Gillian Tett have not learned after all these years, whether people will ever learn. Yeah, I know you did a talk, to bond or not to bond, a year or two
Yeah,
ago.
I don't know, Stephen. I wrestle with this all the time. Is it really that there's some kind of a barrier that we need to overcome in terms of the learning? Is it that if we just articulated more clearly, if we were somehow haven't been compelling in the past, and if we just put forward that one silver bullet killer set of arguments with the right framing and the right bullet points and the right visuals, and I see people all the time. They send me things. Do you think this does it? Will this change? If I put this out there, will everyone wake up tomorrow and agree that the MMT narrative on these things is the correct way to understand them? Like there's some magic recipe we just haven't discovered. Unfortunately, I don't think that's it. Um, After 30 years, I think we have tried it in every format that I can imagine. We started off really just a small number of academics trying to convince other academics, mostly peer-reviewed journal articles, books, edited volumes, chapter, all that kind of stuff, and made little headway within the discipline. And then with the financial crisis, after 2007, 2008. Bill Mitchell was already blogging, but a handful of us in Kansas City decided, well, maybe we're trying to communicate with the wrong group of people. Maybe we should, have a more popular discourse and try to reach different audiences. So we launched that blog, which was the New Economic Perspectives blog. And that writing style then changes, right? It's more pithy. It's not that well, unless it's Scott Fullwiler, in which case it was always pretty high level academic stuff.
Yeah.
But the rest of us tried, I think, to communicate in ways that were easier for the layperson to grab onto. And where we had the earliest success was really with journalists in the financial who were covering financial markets and the economy. And there were just, I can say, I think the names of three people who were just intellectually curious. And they saw us putting out this stuff, and it sounded so different from what, Ken Rogoff was writing, but even different from what people like Paul Krugman were writing. I mean, we were occupying a very different lane. And that got us some attention. And I think over the years, not just attention, but we began to develop some respect from folks, who cover financial markets, where they started reaching out to call us to get quotes for articles and insights on our thinking. And so I think you just have to try. You try podcasts, you try videos, you try giving a TED talk, you try working with lawmakers directly. You just have a full frontal attack and hope that in little ways you're going to make headway with different groups, and over time it becomes something like what you see here right now.
So a lot was left on the cutting room floor then for, well, it always is. I mean, I've done radio interviews and They go on for ages and ages and ages, and there's a couple of sentences sometimes that you get in a program. What did you leave on the cutting room floor, or what did they
Well,
do?
all the stuff that you teach when you
Yeah,
cover this stuff, the sequencing.
yeah,
They didn't get up to, that's what I said about backing up, you
yeah,
know. You, I know, have been lately reminding people that if there's anxiety about whether bond markets are have sufficient appetite to take up issuance, and there's all this hand-wringing about how many more treasuries or gilts or JGBs are going to be issued, and what is going to happen when markets have reached their capacity, and they say, oh, I don't want to buy anymore. And you remind people that for a very long time in the UK, the auctions weren't handled the way that they're handled today. There was a tap system. And so if people are really nervous about the aggregate appetite for purchasing gilts or treasuries or something, that we could always choose to return to a tap system where governments can make an offer of a quantity of securities and let financial investors and others take up that which they wish to purchase and no more, right?
yeah. Absolutely. That's and for any Australians listening, that's exactly how it worked until 1982. If the bond market didn't want to buy Australian Treasury securities, they just didn't sell any.
It's a sensible um, halfway house
Mm,
between what we do now and a sort of cold turkey approach that some
mm.
other, MMT folks might have suggested in the past. Well, then just stop issuing them, as if you can, just make the proclamation tomorrow. Heretofore, there shall be no further issuance of these securities when you've got a collateralized system, a global financial system that is, in a sense, set up institutionally to have a desire and a need for these things. You don't just go cold turkey. So we could phase them out over time. We could do something Warren's talked about over the years, which is just, don't issue anything with a duration longer than 3 months, and anchor the overnight rate somewhere very close to zero and be done with it. So there are a lot of different ways that we could think about making adjustments, modifications to the way we currently do things. But I think the tap system is a nice one because it's a reminder that we did do it this way for a very long time, right? Yeah.
Well, they what they usually say, of course, if you make that suggestion is, well, that's going to involve printing money, and that's going to be inflationary. And the way that we control inflation is to have governments not run deficits that are too big, to be disciplined by the bond market, and to then leave inflation management to the central bank, to have monetary policy in charge. And if we expect the inflation rate to go up, then the central bank will nudge interest rates up and keep things under control. Um, if we're not going to manage inflation that way, then how are we going to manage inflation?
Well, I think you need to develop a much richer and more sophisticated toolkit for managing inflationary pressures, recognizing, my husband said when we saw inflation begin to pick up in 2022, and of course, then it became increasingly a problem. And then there was all sorts of discourse. And I remember my husband saying, if you've seen one inflation, you've seen one inflation.
Mhm.
And I thought it was, made me laugh at the time
Mm,
because it was sort of, he's a historian, he's a history
mm.
professor. And so he's thinking about this through a sort of historical lens where, take an inflationary episode and drill down and say, what gave rise to the inflation and the sustained increases in prices. Um, and yeah, there are dynamics and you can find similar characteristics sometimes, but to know how to address inflationary pressures when they're presenting themselves, it's a rather good idea to figure out what the drivers of the inflationary pressures are. So this one size fits all knee-jerk response, which is just raise interest rates to deal with any and all inflation that might present itself, has not served us well at all. I have made the case, I think in um, maybe an interview with the FT about a year ago, that my argument is basically that, and I think the evidence bears this out, the inflation that we experienced most recently, 2022 and into 2023, was overwhelmingly driven by supply side factors, the COVID pandemic itself, changing nature and the composition of aggregate demand, different waves of the pandemic hitting different parts of the world, straining, bottlenecks, and you know all of this. And then a war and food and energy prices and compounding iterative impacts on prices, not to forget the work of Isabella Weber and her colleagues and the opportunistic price increases that also drove inflationary pressures during that time. So you think about what could we do in the future, not in a crisis moment like that, let's set that one aside, but just in the normal course of business. You mentioned deficits and the fear that government deficits will be inflationary. Well, the government's been running fiscal deficits for basically my entire lifetime. I think that part was included in the BBC
Yeah.
interview. So, with the exception of 4 years during the Clinton administration, the US government has run budget deficits. The UK is mostly running deficits. Japan has run large fiscal deficits for well over the better part of 3 decades with no inflation to show for it in any of these places. It was only when we got the pandemic, we finally got inflation to even get to the Fed's 2% target here after the last decade of struggling to hit that. So, what would you do in normal times to guard against inflation becoming a problem? If you got a bunch of lawmakers who are sitting around writing legislation and they have these, ambitions to spend hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars on infrastructure investment, climate resilience, healthcare, education, all that sort of stuff. And if those folks are thinking, now, as long as I pay for my spending, I don't have to worry about anything, right? The only thing that matters is keeping it deficit neutral. And the MMT lens is applied, and you say, hold on. Deficit neutral and inflation neutral are not the same thing, you see? And that, I'll tell you a story, because I was doing an event with Ken Rogoff maybe a couple of years ago. And I was on stage, we were doing a little dog and pony thing for an investment group or something. And I made this argument, made this point on stage. And after I finished, he got up and had an opportunity to respond to some of the things I said. And he said, Stephanie raised a really good point right there. And he repeated it back. He said, that had never occurred to me. And I thought, wow, you were at the IMF advising countries on how to structure, fiscal policy and the like. And it hadn't occurred to a Harvard leading economist that you're not mitigating inflation risk just because you offset proposed spending with some increase in tax. So I'll give you an example in case the point is not clear to everyone. Let's just do something really crazy hypothetical. Let's say that we went back to the days of when people like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was talking about a $10 trillion spend on a Build Back Better, Green New Deal, kind of massive investments in the social safety net, infrastructure, education, jobs, the whole thing. And you say, I want to spend $10 trillion, but I want to be really fiscally responsible when I do it. And so I'm not going to add to the deficit and I'm not going to increase the debt. I'm going to get the rich to pay for everything. And so I'm only going to level tax increases on people, as Senator Elizabeth Warren called them, at the very tippy top, the tippy toppers. The tippy toppers will pay for it all, and we'll get the 10 trillion from a tiny sliver of folks at the top, and we'll plow $10 trillion into the hands of people in the broader economy. And it sounds great. right? If you're someone who cares about inequality, social justice, you say, wow, this is the way to go. But if you apply the MMT lens, you might say, I don't know that it's a good idea to start pushing $10 trillion into the broader economy whilst removing 10 trillion from the tippy toppers who are mostly not going to spend that money in the first place. They're saving it, right? So ask yourself if you're mitigating any inflationary pressure when you push 10 in and take 10 out from the very top. And I would suggest that the answer is rather obvious, that it will have a de minimis impact on their spending and therefore not serve as a very good inflationary, anti-inflationary mechanism, right? That tax is not going to do that part of the job well. It will do the other job quite well, which is addressing disparities in income or wealth, depending on what kind of tax we're talking about. And so when I say something like that, it sometimes ruffles the feathers of progressives who view themselves as, you know, really ardent Robin Hood type warriors who think they have a very clean, compelling narrative. Politicians can repeat it. The population will eat it up because why shouldn't the rich pay for everything? They have all the money. And then as an economist, your job is to be better than that and to give better guidance to lawmakers on behalf of
Yeah,
the public.
it's very difficult for them to, because I mean, you used to talk to Bernie, and that was his narrative really, and despite the fact he was at our conference and understands things better than this, it sometimes sounds like that's the narrative of Zach Polanski over in the UK too. It's so easy to sell that message, isn't it?
It is easy to sell it. And, you know, he's not the only one. There are some high profile names over there. And look, they work with some people who I consider good friends and allies. You know, we have an organization over here called the Patriotic Millionaires. And it
Mm.
was founded by a man named Morris Pearl, and he's great. He's super. And, you know, he started this organization with some like minded individuals who at the time thought, you know what, we really need to step up and pay our fair share. And the tax code is riddled with loopholes, and guys like us are, you know, taking advantage of them, and it isn't fair. And our infrastructure struggles, and our health system, and our educational system, and we ought to be patriotic, raise our hands, and say, take more from us so we can have a better world. And it's admirable. And um, I will say, since launching the Patriotic Millionaires, Morris has come around to a different way of understanding the purpose of tax at the federal level. So he can still make the same sets of arguments if he's working with the, you know, governor of California or something like that, or the new mayor of New York City. Those arguments really do make sense. You know, they're revenue constrained, and it's a helpful frame to bring to those sort of people. But for the UK government, where I know the Patriotic Millionaires have worked with candidates and have influenced, I don't know how many names, but you know who they are. I mean, there are a couple of high profile YouTubers or podcasters who push this line as well. And yeah, what could be easier than just saying Robin Hood, you know, tax the rich. You put it on a bumper sticker and zoom away, you know? That's your whole slogan.
Yeah, and just to repeat what you were saying before, we're not saying don't tax the rich, especially in the US, where I mean the inequality is through the roof compared even to
You
other
know,
high
Stephen,
income countries.
because so many people think that that's what MMT folks are saying, don't tax the rich. I want to, if you don't mind, press on that point for one more minute,
Mm.
because no, that is definitely not the point. So, another story I think about how much of this I want to share. I guess it's okay. Um, well, maybe I'll be a little coy. I was working with advisors to a different senator
Mm,
on the question of a wealth tax and that sort of thing. And I was asked about, what if we came in with this percent tax on net worth of this much and an extra this much percent once you get to a higher number. And I said, and the percentages were really low. And I said, well, what's the purpose of the wealth tax? And the advisor said, um, well, we're paying for the child care and some student debt forgiveness. You're all going to figure out who this is anyway.
mm,
This is, to pay for these things, but also, address the concentration of wealth inequality. And I said, well, as a pay for on paper to satisfy the scorekeeper, the CBO, fine if that's the way you insist on going. But as a way of addressing concentrations of wealth, you're going to have effectively no impact. And this particular senator went on to acknowledge on television and elsewhere that the wealth tax was so small, so
mm.
trivial, that wealth will accumulate at a much faster clip, meaning they will continue to get richer and richer and richer every year and still be the wealthiest people in the world. To which I say, then what is the point of a wealth tax, right? And it becomes clear at that moment that the point of the wealth tax is really just to peel off just enough. You don't really touch them or hurt them. You're just peeling off just enough to slap it on a piece of legislation to be able to say to the scorekeeper, haven't I done a good job? My proposed spending on debt cancellation and child care and all the rest of it is fiscally responsible. It won't increase the deficit. So I just think it's the wrong way to draft legislation. And I think it puts all of us at risk when you structure your bill that way, because you're not thinking about the inflation risk. And if the last election taught us anything, it's that people really do hate inflation. We did not like it. People do not want to go back to a world where prices are up 22, 24% over, 3, 4 years.
And that's really the main reason for being tough on inflation. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just
it's politically,
mm,
it is unpopular.
mm,
People don't like it. And we could have an extended conversation about trade-offs and about, the whether you heard a lot of people during the inflationary phase, the post-pandemic period, you heard a lot of people say things like, well, inflation is bad because it hurts everyone. And unemployment is bad, but it only hurts the people who are without jobs. I think that is absolutely untrue.
mm.
Absolutely untrue. But I heard it said over and over and over, mostly on, shows like CNBC's financial, the Wall Street Network. That's their line, that the reason you must be really tough and get inflation all the way back down to two, and you can't stop and you can't settle until it's back down to two, is because inflation, boy, it's really the roughest on the little guy, but it hurts everyone the same. No, it doesn't, right?
No, well, there's I don't know about as many gainers, but there are gainers from inflation as well as losers, and there are economists that I respect a great deal who write that some inflations are good. Um, you, in John Harvey's, I mean, that's an argument that's in John Harvey's excellent new book on U.S. business cycles. That
I was just reading another rereading a chapter yesterday. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. No, but I mean, look, when people make the joke when it's a recession when your neighbor loses his job, it's a depression when you lose yours and all that kind of stuff. But
mm,
you have to think about, and Pavlina does a really good job talking
mm,
about unemployment in this way, right?
mm.
Unemployment is socially destructive. It isn't the case that it is only impacting the individual who is without work. it hurts families and communities. And I never understood how people make that argument that it's so localized that, well, it's a shame when 7 million people don't have jobs, but it's a crisis when 300 million pay more for milk, you know?
Well, there's all sorts of other things that I'd like to ask you about, but maybe, Gabby, we ought to open up to questions. What do you think?
Sure. There's a question in the chat a little bit further up from Tom, asking you to talk about funding and climate action from an MMT lens.
Okay. Um, funding and climate action. So do we know where the question came from?
Yep, from
It's a
Tom.
bit like I can give a quick and dirty answer, which seems like you would expect me to say that. So I'm wondering if there's more nuance because the last chapter of my book
I
deals.
found the actual question.
Okay.
Perhaps I'll read it.
Okay.
Could Stephanie talk about how MMT can assist progressing action on climate change?
Well,
MMT understanding, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I have to say that the biggest impact I think that we can and have had on this is knocking down the myth that there isn't enough money to be able to deal with climate. I did a World Economic Forum panel or something. Years ago, I seem to remember John Kerry um, saying, and Janet Yellen, they've all said comments like this. It's got to be mostly the private sector. The public sector they don't have the money, so we're going to have to rely. Ultimately, it's going to have to be incentives, and we're going to have to get the private sector to pick up the tab because there simply isn't enough money. And I think that's where MMT has provided made the greatest contribution, which is just, whether it's 5 trillion, 11 trillion, trillion. I mean, that can't be the barrier to entry on climate action. It can't be, the hurdle can't be, there isn't enough money to pay for it. And that's when I think MMT had its real kind of blowout moment was when Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez released that little blueprint. And, there in the footnotes were links to some of the MMT literature on and how will you pay for 16 trillion or 10 trillion in a Green New Deal. And that's when it really started to shift the paradigm around, who and how we pay for bold action.
Thank you. There's another question here. Could Stephanie talk about a future of what happens when we reduce government service, increase privatization, and kind of what happens under authoritarian governments?
What?
How is that supposed to improve life for ordinary people?
That's what's happened, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's rather, I mean, I think the person who posed the question, I suspect, knows the answer to the question.
I think so.
And I think probably most of us sitting here together right now know the answer to the question. It's not to say that you can't privatize some services that have been delivered through the public sector and all hell goes, everything goes to hell. I'm not taking that position, but I think you can find lots and lots of examples where that has been the case. Water, rail, electricity. I mean, you just go down the list, right? Not that it can't be done, but when you couple it with an authoritarian shift to authoritarian regime and a wholesale hollowing out of public sector, which I think if Doge had been permitted to carry on with what it was trying to do and what Project 2025 is frankly about, is the hollowing out of the public sector and turning as much as we can. I think we just had released today, apparently, some proposal for, I'm not going to call it healthcare. It's not a healthcare proposal. It's a plan to, finally, once and for all, get rid of the Affordable Care Act And I haven't had a chance to look at it. I've been at work all day, but what I saw in terms of headlines was something like, give people $2,000 and let them go shopping for health insurance coverage, which, is what, $28,000 for a family of four, something like that. Good luck.
Yeah. Yep.
But
yeah, it's scary times, I think. I don't really know what to say about it.
it's a smash and grab. That's what
Mm,
it is. That's what's going on. It's a smash and
mm,
grab.
mm. Um, shall we open it up to questions from the audience?
Paul, did I see something from Paul in Fremantle? I'm seeking better explanations of terms like deficit. E.g., is there a link between GDP and deficit?
Well, that's good. See, that's
Yeah,
a good reminder
yeah.
that you should define your terms and never
Mm.
assume that your audience is, all equipped to have. Yeah, let's do that. So the word itself carries all sorts of negative connotation, right? You hear the word deficit, nobody wants to be in that position.
Yep.
You're watching, I often go on radio or TV or whatever and say, you turn on the tube and you hear the announcer say, if let's give me the local team favorite. Who do you all follow? Some rugby
Oh,
team. Give me a team.
Port Power.
Okay. If Port Power is going to come back and win this game, they're going to have to overcome a 3-point deficit or a two, whatever
Yeah.
it is. I don't, you don't want to be in deficit. Everybody sort of inherently has that reaction. So when you hear the government is running its budget in deficit, it sounds like something's gone wrong. You're on the wrong side of that arrangement. But what is the government deficit? What does it really tell you? It tells you the difference between two numbers. That's literally all it is. One number is outlays. So think of it as how much the government is doing this, putting dollars into your hands, or pounds or yen or pesos or whatever it is. So the difference between outlays, how much they're putting out, and receipts, right? How much they're collecting from the rest of us, mostly in the form of taxes, right? We're collecting a lot of tariffs now, but tariffs tax. So I'll use the US case and keep the numbers simple. Right now, the federal government is spending roughly 7 trillion annually. That's outlays, boom. And collecting about 5 trillion, right? So that's receipts. So if they put 7 in your hands and then take 5 away from you, we label it a government deficit because spending, the outlays, exceed what they're collecting back. So we call it a deficit. But if someone hands you $7 and then takes $5 back from you, what have they actually done?
Given you $2.
They've given you $2.
Yeah.
They've added $2 to your pocket, to your account. So this is why MMT is really insistent that we pay attention to both sides of the ledger. So if the government is running a $2 trillion deficit, it means the non-government part of the economy has a surplus equal to exactly 2 trillion, right? That 2 trillion goes somewhere. So what I always try to do is say every deficit is good for someone, period, full stop. Every deficit is good for someone. The question is, or the questions are, for whom? They're good for someone, for whom, and for what? For what? Are those deficits being used to accomplish things in the economy that improve health and well-being, safety, security? Do you get better roads, more efficient infrastructure, better educational system, better health outcomes? Or are you running deficits that primarily send a windfall to the people who are already doing phenomenally well? Maybe all you did was cut taxes on people at the top, big corporations, whatever. Those deficits are good for someone too.
Mhm.
They serve a very deliberate small constituency. So deficit's just difference between two numbers. It's how many dollars or pounds or yen, the government is adding to someone's pocket on an annual, right, each year, measured annually. It's a financial contribution to some part of the economy.
I have an excellent question here from Jacob. Hello, Stephanie. I'm just reading your book and I'm curious whether there are some major issues or topics that you've shifted your opinion on or position on since writing it.
I don't think so. I think that I would say that there are definitely areas that I would emphasize in, give more attention to, develop more fully. Some people read the book and said, where's the private credit system? What about, banks and how banks create money and all that? So that's fine.
That was explained really well.
That's a different book. My book was about public money. And
it's explained in the movie, not so much. The book, though, I mean, if you'd added those things to the book, it would have got too long.
Oh, yeah. It was a bit of a distraction, and it wasn't the purpose of the book was to help people understand how public money works and the misunderstandings we have around, public currency. But the inflation chapter, obviously, I think in that chapter I said no one knows when or if inflation might present itself again as a problem. But I did title the second chapter of the book, Think of Inflation. So even, then I was trying to stress that this needs to be the focus. It's not how big is the deficit, what is the trajectory of debt, and so forth. It's, inflation risk. And I was so bothered by the fact that I worked in the Senate and I was surrounded by all of these staffers and lawmakers writing trillion-dollar pieces of legislation, 100 billion, whatever, and never pausing once to think about the inflationary implications of the bills. And so anyway, I'm working on a new book, and it is
lots of questions about that. People are very excited.
The theme that runs through the book is inflation. Yes. So now it's busting a whole new set of myths and misunderstandings around how we think about inflation, how we respond to inflationary pressure, how we understand it, whether it is indeed behind us, and all the rest of it.
There's somebody who's been waving at us. Nettie, would you like to unmute? You have to unmute. Okay, we'll come back to you. You could type your question in. Happy to do that.
There's a question from Jeremy as well.
Yeah, question from Jeremy. Coming back to Stephen's question about discussing issues in the context of the current paradigm versus the context of new ideas, I'm interested in your thoughts on central bank independence in the current international central bank consensus versus what new regimes we could put forward for the future.
Well, I am of the strong opinion that Congress is the boss of the Fed. Federal Reserve is a creature of Congress. Created in 1913 in the Federal Reserve Act, Congress can and has modified the mandate for the Fed over the years. 1978, Humphrey Hawkins broadens and makes responsibility for a variety of things, including full employment, the responsibility not just of the Fed, but of the government, which means it is in concert, working together with Congress and the fiscal authority to pursue macroeconomic objectives, price stability and full employment, and maintaining the payment system and financial market functioning and all the rest of it, right? Low and stable interest rates supposed to be an objective. So this is going about it very much the wrong way through the executive branch. That's not the way to put pressure on the Fed. But, presidents past and present have tried to influence the Fed. This is not unique with Donald Trump. There's a long history of trying to lean on the Fed to get the interest rate environment that you think best complements your economic agenda, but it really ought to be Congress. And we have for a very long time advocated Congress taking more control over its budget, because when the Fed took interest rates from 0 to 5.25%, it very quickly turned the fastest growing line item in the government's budget, which is interest on the
Yep.
national debt.
Yep, there's a
That became the
question about that
fastest growing,
too in the chat.
right?
Yeah.
So why should the Fed effectively be running fiscal policy, which is what happened when the fastest growing part of your budget is out of your control, because it's a function of what's happening with monetary policy. I think it's entirely reasonable to think that Congress would want to reclaim that sort of budgetary authority and say, we want interest rates maintained at a lower level. But that ought to be Congress, not the White House.
It's strange that this always comes from the right wing of politics and never the progressive side. We don't seem to be able to.
Almost never. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're ready for you, Nettie. Go ahead.
Except I'm not Nettie. My sister's name is on here. I'm Deborah Harrington. Hi, Steve. Hi, Stephanie. I wanted to go back really to what you touched on earlier on, which is about shifting the dial politically, which we've had very little success in the UK, the States, Australia, whatever. And I'm just really, really aware that, the way that this is done at the moment, the way that that's influenced is that there are lots of institutes, there are lots of think tanks who are pumping out constantly what is effectively propaganda, giving reports and analysis of the economic situation. And they send those reports all the time to MPs, to the Press Association, to the new, to the mass media, to everybody. They just kind of pump out these things all the time. And we don't have an equivalent. A lot of the work that we do is about grassroots. It's about getting sort of membership and spreading it locally and, to ordinary people, if you like. And we don't seem to have organised any kind of concerted political kind of pressure. And the one place where we seem to have it is Zach Polanski, who I know went to Stephen's Modern Money Lab thing in Bristol, which was really good. And the Green Party, England and Wales, have got a really good economic policy group who are very MMT influenced. I mean, that is the main driver of the way that they're setting out their policy. When they presented it to conference, it got referred back. In other words, it can't be raised again until next year. And in the meantime, you've got you've got certain people who've moved into the party who represent an entirely different view. Some of whom are very sort of against MMT.
And Deborah, could you just summarize for your question?
Sorry, it's just that this is the thing. It's like how far to what you two are very high profile. You're very active. You've got very good connections. To what extent do you think you can help to influence those particular things, to drive those particular things, to have that kind of, to start setting up those kind of organisations or institutions, or to make contact with Zach, or to do anything else that might actually drive an in through the, into the political scene, because it's missing.
I mean, I've done these kind of webinar things with British lawmakers, MPs. I think at one time I did one that had 60 MPs, and they were cross-party. Most, I think, probably at the time were Labour. There were some Greens and some SNP and a handful of Tories on that one, if I remember. Look, I saw somebody pushed into my timeline yesterday, a clip that I happened to watch. It intrigued me, and it was Zach, I think, at an event at University College London, and I listened to him say, I'm rereading Stephanie Kelton's book, which is a good sign. Because you go back to it the second time, it suggests you're really trying to take on board, right, the content. He had seen the film. He mentioned that they had watched the movie and so forth. So I know that he has, I have not sat down personally with him, but I know that he's done podcast conversations with people like Richard Murphy, And so I gather that some of this is seeping in, and he is, at the moment, anyway, I think, um, leader of a party that is maybe
Going from strength to strength. Mm.
growing most rapidly, I think. So I don't know, what happens on the ground. And in the UK, I hear from people like Susan Borden and others here connected with this group. There are all kinds of smart, engaged, passionate people out there in their own ways building. And maybe Susan wants to talk about this. She shared with me something somebody is working on that's connected with this group, ways to transform. Susan, help me. People who want to be involved but maybe don't have the bandwidth, and maybe there's a sort of platform being built where you can go and say, "Help me kick out, I don't know, a letter to the editor, or help me, demonstrate my interest and have a voice that pushes these ideas forward in a way that's not so taxing on the individual because it's kind of curated in a new platform." I don't fully
Yeah.
know, but
Some of you do know, certainly all of you in the UK know that Chris Bland has been working on a kind of learning modality, I guess we might call it, that is for people who don't have the fantastic privilege of being part of this program, but also for the rest of us too, who are burdened with time and just could use an assist. So the controversial bit, I suppose, if there is one, is that he's trained, this isn't controversial at all, he's trained an AI bot, really, on Christian Riley and Patricia Pino's 350 hours of podcasts, replete with all of the papers that they always cite also in their show notes and things like that. So it's a pretty terrific repository of good thinking and good questions.
And remarkably consistent over many, many years of the program.
Yeah, it's the standard's been very high. So I encourage you all, if you want to sign up. Maybe, Gabby, we could post it, but to the UK Discord, because then you have access to this and can fool with it and see what you think.
I have posted a link to that further up.
This is exactly the kind of thing, I think, Deborah, that answers the question, which is all of the people, Christian and Patricia, are perfect examples of people who came to this and then wanted to do in their own way, make a contribution to, spreading ideas, elevating, these ideas in the public discourse, whether it's through YouTubes or podcasts or building, new platforms. I have been amazed over 20 years at the energy that people have shown. The US, the UK, Australia, all over the world. People have leaned into this. And that's why, it so often gets described as a movement. I've never seen anything like it. In economics, Warren will joke, who joins the movement for the real business cycle theorists. There isn't one. But somehow this resonates with people, and they do see it as containing, seeds of wisdom that, if better understood, could lead us to a place where we get better public policy, a better world. And I think that's what motivates so many people to give up huge portions of their time. Steve Grumbine in the US, my God, I mean, people doing this kind of stuff, on their own time, carving out parts of their life for years to dedicate it to trying to spread these ideas. So I applaud everyone who has done that. It's remarkable.
And it brings us such joy to see the amazing, excellent things that our students get up to all over the world. There's groups popping up everywhere. People are putting on talks and weekends. People are getting together. People are building websites. People are making content. It's just so heartening, really. I mean, it's easy to be depressed when you look at the Guardian app and see all the dreadful things that are happening, and it is probably the worst it's ever been in many ways. But we feel like we have a growing and thriving and welcoming community here in the master's degree, and that has branched out into so many other things. We're going to be traveling again to Europe and the UK and hopefully Canada, and we're trying to get around to meet people in person, which is always such a joy. And yeah, we're doing things outside of the degree too, like this lecture series, and we have talks throughout the year that you can be involved in. There is plenty of things to do and plenty of networks to join and like-minded people out there.
Gabby, that you said the word that I think is the key to all of this, and that's community. When people get involved, when they sign up for these courses and they start interacting, what I've heard from folks over and over again is that they've found a community to be part of.
That's what we would like to do.
You're all online, but then you have these opportunities for people to gather and meet in person for the first time, people that they've interacted with in little boxes like these, and to bring all of the collective energy and heart. I mean, it's a community of good people trying to do good things for the world. And so, and you and Stephen, I mean, you can't mention the people who sacrifice and give without putting the two of you at the very top.
Oh, thank you so much. We seem to have lost Stephen to his computer seems to have died. He's obviously left me a voicemail, but I haven't listened to it. So he's not on the call anymore. So I think he has actually had to drop off due to tech issues. But well, we're right on the hour. Perhaps I'll just open it up to a few more questions if you don't mind an extra couple of minutes, and then we can wrap.
I can do an extra couple of minutes. I'm going to go pick Mr. Kelton up from the ferry here in just a little bit.
There's probably plenty of questions in the chat. Oh, here's one from James about bond markets. Should we end on bonds? My favorite topic. MMT. Sorry, I'm not quite sure about that question. I will read it. Question for Stephanie. Is MMT implying the end of bond markets because governments don't need to fund expenditure or an expansion because they will no longer seek to reduce, avoid a deficit? I think Phil has also typed some answers there, and other folks as well, but do you want to comment on that?
When you say the bond market, again, it depends who you ask. Some of us might feel differently. I think maybe Bill Mitchell has written over many years, many times, that his preference would be to suspend issuance of all securities of any duration, right? No government securities. There's no purpose for it. Warren might. Sometimes he's in one side. Sometimes I think he says something a little different. He might say no bonds, but just do T-bills, so keep it short. I've heard him make the other argument as well, which is just get rid of it all. It's more trouble than it's worth. So depends who you ask, but at a very minimum, reduce the interest income channel to something very close to zero.
Thank you. Let's perhaps go with this one. Question for Stephanie. Do you have an opinion on the most important and or interesting topics, what the most important and or interesting topics are for MMT informed economists to be researching at the moment? That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that inflation is going to be a big one for a long time to come. I think if you think about the geopolitical world, I think if you think about it in terms of climate, I think ongoing, persistent disruptions of one kind or another with respect to whether it's droughts and supply chain issues, God forbid war. But let's just stay on climate to make it kind of straightforward. I think there is a lot of important work to be done on how to mitigate inflationary pressures in a world of, Isabella Weber might say, overlapping emergencies. So
I see Stephen's back with us. Excellent.
Sorry,
I found the
it's my
perfect
fault for being in the remote Adelaide Hills.
I found the perfect quote to end on from Nick, who's written it in the chat. If you can read the chat, you'll agree with me. And Isabella has asked if there's anyone from Latin America. She's going to be in Manila and would like to meet. So please reach out if you can see that comment. And there was somebody who is from the Philippines, but I think he had to go. So maybe Isabella, we can put you in touch with that person. Scott, one of Scott's.
Jesus Philippe.
Yes.
Yes.
We have a student from the Philippines, Gabby.
We do, Nathaniel. Yeah.
Yes.
Anybody else? Somebody written in the chat. Owen has a question. Owen, are you with us?
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Go ahead.
Hi, Gabby. Hi, Steve. Hi, Stephanie, and everyone else.
Hi.
Stephanie, we met briefly at the MMT UK conference, and I asked a cheeky question, but I didn't get an answer because I think I got interrupted. But it was like when you spoke to Jared, what did you said? I said, was he embarrassed? And I don't know if you want to answer this on this.
So I am so glad that you asked this question because I've known Jared for many years, but I did not speak to Jared on camera. That was not my voice. That was the director.
Yes. But I mean, like
So,
you spoke to him about that interview, and I said to him, you're like, because it felt like
I never
setup.
did.
Right?
No,
you never did.
No. So this is a really interesting, it made me sad, in a lot of ways, both because I know Jared and I like Jared and I've known him for years, and that was not his best moment. He's a really bright guy.
Yeah.
And that was obviously not his finest moment. And I would not have wanted to be in his shoes when that clip, sort of went viral. But people lashed out at me thinking that I set him up. And they thought that
Right.
the voice on film was my voice because you see me saying, I'm waiting for somebody to ask, why do we issue bonds? Well, that was recorded a gazillion years ago in a conversation with the director, who then apparently, found him and got him on camera and posed the question. Then it's put together in a way that I guess led a lot of people to think that I, um, set him up with this question. That's not me. I didn't ask that question. I saw it for the first time in a movie theater with everybody else in Woodstock, New York, many years ago. So I never spoke with him after, I just felt really bad that I knew, that's when you want to do over because it just didn't come out the right way.
Stephen has a thought on that. Do you want to?
No, I'm just going to. Does everyone know what Owen's referring to? There, the clip of the film where Jared Bernstein is asked about the question that Stephanie had raised with the director previously, essentially, what's the purpose of issuing bonds in the first place? And just on the spur of the moment, and to be fair, I've not had this freeze, but I have had a sort of freeze in an interview before now, where I thought I'm making a fool of myself. So it is easy to do if you feel under pressure. But I mean, on the other hand, he's obviously I don't know him, and I do think that it is a serious issue if the person advising the president on economic policy could possibly get in such a muddle. over such a basic issue as that. I'm sure he's a delightful man and highly intelligent, but he really didn't understand public finance.
And let's also be fair to the filmmaker. He did sign the release after
that's right.
that had been recorded.
Doesn't mean we don't think he's a very able man, but it was shocking.
It's like when Warren writes in his book, The 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds, that he would have these conversations about monetary operations with a former Treasury Secretary. And Warren is explaining the mechanics of the monetary system, and the person who should know these things says, well, I can't really speak about it at that level. I don't really understand reserve accounting or the yikes, you know?
Okay, we should probably wrap up soon. Is there anybody else who'd like to ask a short question, and then I'll finish with that beautiful quote from Nick?
I hope you feel better soon.
Sorry, I usually mute myself.
No. It's tough doing something like this. We're so grateful.
We are.
We must say, Stephanie's done lots of these events with us, and she has so many other calls on her time. We're very, very grateful every time she does it.
And there are lots of questions that we didn't get to in the chat, including some good ones from Jason, one of our students who's recently moved to the UK. Sorry, Jason. Let me just read what Nick posted. Change is slow until it's not. I'm confident the tide will turn eventually. The dinosaurs will be gone soon. In the meantime, we learn, create, and share.
If you're able, Gabby, Stephen, if you're able to, I don't know, copy paste or screen grab or any of what's in the chat, it could make good fodder for me for a future Substack, or maybe some
we can do that
question to address in the book or something. I'd love to see the questions anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
I hear somebody. Hello. I have company now. So you can't see him because I've got the screen background on. Well, anyway, Ozzy is here.
Hey, Ozzy.
Very eager for a walk.
The most photogenic dog.
We can't see.
No, you can't see.
But you can see him in the movie. If you haven't watched Finding the Money, watch Finding the Money and you'll see Ozzy.
Wait a minute. Can you see Ozzy? Come here. Zoom a little bit.
Oh, we can see some ears.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you. This was lots of fun.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Superstar. Get well soon.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Really appreciate it. You can catch the recording. If you missed any of it, you can catch the recording on our YouTube channel. And don't forget our other talks coming up next week and the week after. Check the registration emails that you've got, or the website for when those are.
Including one by Phil, who's been commenting a lot, very helpfully in the chat.
Yes, he has been writing some excellent long explanations. And I can probably stop the recording there.